There comes a moment when silence speaks louder than words. And it's in that moment that most people break. They start chasing, they start apologizing for things they didn't do. They abandon their power, all for a breadcrumb of connection, but not you. Because the real you doesn't operate from fear. The real you doesn't react to a wall being built. You remind them of the door that's always been open. When someone avoids, when they shut down and go silent, it's not about you. It's about the war within them. You got to remember this. Their silence is not rejection, it's protection. Not of you, but of themselves. They're terrified of intimacy, not because it's weak, but because it's weak. And real requires surrender. And surrender feels like death to someone who has survived by control. So what do you do when they don't reply? You don't beg, you don't chase, you don't send 6 paragraphs explaining your worth. You send one message, one line, one vibration so anchored in truth, it can't be ignored. Because when you send that message, you're not trying to reopen the door. They already know where it is. You're not trying to make them feel guilty. They're already drowning in emotions they don't know how to process. You're sending a signal, a reflection of clarity, love, and power. And that message, it doesn't come from anger. It comes from knowing, from divine alignment, from your soul speaking through your words. Because here's the truth. In relationships, the most powerful person is the one who needs nothing but brings everything. Not manipulation, not performance, but presence. You're not here to save them, you're here to invite them back into truth, back into love, back into the version of themselves that can finally stay instead of run. So when you write that message, you write it from a place of absolute stillness, not emotional chaos. You say what's real, not what's reactive. You send it once. Because that message wasn't a tactic, it was a transmission, and it will echo in them long after the text is read. Because when you speak from your highest self, you don't need multiple attempts. One whisper from the soul is louder than 1,000 cries from the ego, so breathe. Ground. When someone pulls away, when their responses fade into a void, it can feel like a dagger in the heart. But that moment right there, when they don't reply, is where most people lose themselves. They assume their value has diminished. They try to fill the space with words, with explanations, with overcompensating energy. They think that silence is stronger than emotion. But here's what they don't realize. Silence only holds power when you hand yours over. Until the next time, remember that the silence only holds power when you hand yours. See, emotion, real, grounded, authentic emotion is not weakness, it's not chaos, it's not neediness. Emotion is fuel, it's life force. It's the evidence that you are alive, connected, and awake, but you must learn to channel that emotion into power, not panic. Into presence, not performance. Into clarity, not confusion. Most people think the one who says nothing is stronger. That the one who ghosts, who withdraws, who avoids, holds the upper hand. That's not strength. That's fear disguised as detachment. True power is the ability to feel and not flinch, to stay emotionally present, even when someone else disappears. When someone avoids you, when they don't reply, your job is not to respond with fear. Your job is to embody emotional mastery, because emotion, when owned and expressed cleanly, is irresistible. It doesn't beg, it doesn't convince, it reminds. It reminds both you and them what's real. When you respond from that space, not impulsively, but intentionally, you shift the entire dynamic. Most avoidants are used to people chasing them, falling into emotional desperation. So when you don't do that, when you send one powerful message that's rooted in truth, not reaction, you interrupt their pattern. You create space. You trigger reflection, not defensiveness, and you prove something profound, that your love is strong, but your center is stronger. Emotion becomes power when you stop outsourcing your worth to someone else's attention. When you stop using their silence as a mirror and start using your own emotion as a compass. That's what makes you unshakable, not being cold, not being quiet, but being anchored. Your emotions are not the enemy. Unregulated emotions are. But when you learn to feel deeply and respond calmly, you become the most powerful person in the room. Even if that room is a silent text thread, the avoidant may not reply, but your emotional clarity sends a signal that reaches far deeper than words. And that signal, the tone of your truth, the energy of your self-respect, the power of your stillness, will echo louder than any silence they could ever send back. Emotion is not just stronger than silence, it transcends it. Avoidants don't fear love, they fear losing themselves in it. This truth changes everything. So many people misread the avoidance silence, withdrawal, or lack of emotional expression as indifference or lack of love. But what's actually happening underneath is far more complex and deeply human. Avoidants were often wired early in life to associate closeness with pain, entrapment, or a loss of identity. Somewhere along the way, connection came with a cost. So when they begin to care, when emotions start to deepen, their subconscious doesn't celebrate it, it panics. To love someone with an avoidant pattern is to witness a battle between their heart and their fear. They may genuinely feel for you, they may long for closeness, but the moment they sense that connection might require vulnerability, surrender, or a softening of their defenses, their old programming kicks in. It whispers, "You're going to get consumed," or "You're going to lose control." So they pull away, not to punish you, but to protect themselves. They step back, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and don't trust those feelings. This is where most people go wrong. They assume that if they love harder, show more affection, or send longer messages, the avoidant will feel safe and come closer. But that's not how it works. What the avoidant needs isn't more intensity, it's more stability. They don't need emotional fireworks. They need emotional ground. A reminder that love doesn't mean losing themselves. That connection doesn't mean being consumed. That's why your message, if you choose to send one, must reflect grounded presence, not emotional pressure. You're not texting to pull them in. You're texting to show that your energy is anchored, that your love is real but not needy, deep but not drowning. When your communication comes from a place of emotional leadership, not emotional chaos, you speak directly to the part of them that longs for connection but is terrified of losing autonomy. They may not reply right away. They may sit with it in silence. But deep inside, that kind of message resonates. It's different from everything else they've experienced. It tells them, "I see you. I respect your need for space. And I'm not here to chase or cage you. I'm here to walk beside you." That tone disarms the avoidant. It lets them breathe. It gives them permission to stay without feeling trapped. Your emotional presence becomes a sanctuary, not a demand. And that shift from pressure to peace is what makes real connection possible. They don't want to run from love. They want to run from the feeling of losing control. When you offer them love that honors both connection and individuality, you don't just reach their mind, you reach their soul. And from that place, even an avoidant can begin to soften, to stay, and eventually to choose intimacy on their own terms. Certainty is magnetic. In a world where emotional signals are often mixed, where words say one thing but energy says another, certainty becomes the rarest and most irresistible frequency, especially when you're dealing with someone who leans avoidant. See, the avoidant is constantly scanning for threats, subtle or overt, that might compromise their emotional autonomy. They're not looking for more emotion, they're looking for emotional clarity. And most people, in their desperation to hold on to a connection, lose that clarity the moment things get uncertain. When the avoidant doesn't reply, it's natural to spiral into doubt. Thoughts race. Did I say something wrong? Should I send another message? Are they done with me? But every message you send from uncertainty broadcasts fear, and fear repels. It creates pressure. It clouds your truth. The irony is, the more emotionally shaky you become, the more it confirms the avoidant's core fear. That closeness will cost them peace. Certainty doesn't mean coldness. It doesn't mean being indifferent or playing games. True certainty is a deeply grounded energy. It says, "I know who I am, I know what I offer, and I'm not afraid of your space, because my self-worth isn't hanging in the balance." That energy is what makes someone stop scrolling, stop running, and start feeling, because they can sense they're not being pulled into chaos. They're being invited into coherence. The most powerful messages aren't the ones that beg for attention or clarity. They're the ones that embody clarity. When you send a message from a space of certainty, it doesn't matter whether it's one sentence or five, it carries the full weight of someone who knows their value and doesn't need to prove it. It says, "I'm reaching out, not because I'm lost without you, but because I stand with you, even if you're unsure right now." Avoidants aren't drawn to people who make them feel chased. They're drawn to people who make them feel safe. And safety comes from energetic stability. When you're clear, calm, and emotionally grounded, you become the anchor in a storm, the lighthouse, not the wave. And that energy is unforgettable. It lingers. It plants a seed in the avoidant's mind that says maybe closeness doesn't have to mean chaos. Maybe love can exist where certainty lives. Your certainty does more than attract. It liberates. It frees you from emotional reactivity. It allows you to communicate without needing a specific outcome. It shifts your power back into your own hands. Because the truth is, you don't send that one message to get them back. You send it because it reflects who you are, not who they need to be. And in that, you become the rarest kind of person in their world. Someone who doesn't collapse under pressure, someone who speaks without pleading, and someone whose presence commands respect without saying a word. That's the magnetism of certainty. It doesn't demand, it draws. Speak to the soul, not the symptoms. When someone avoids you, goes silent, or pulls back, it's easy to get caught up in what you see on the surface. The unanswered messages, the emotional distance, the excuses, or worse, the complete lack of them. And in response, most people go straight to the symptoms. They try to fix the silence. They argue with the behavior. They send messages trying to address the problem without ever reaching the person. But you don't change someone's heart by debating their defenses. You reach their soul by speaking to the truth underneath the fear. Avoidants have learned to survive by managing their internal chaos alone. To them, emotions are overwhelming, connection can feel threatening, so when things get real, when feelings rise, they pull back, not because they don't care, but because the weight of vulnerability feels like a trap. They've been taught, consciously or unconsciously, that to be safe is to stay in control. And when you react to their symptoms, when you criticize the silence, question their behavior, or try to force a response, you confirm their fear, that closeness equals danger. So instead of reacting to the symptoms, you have to see through them. See the fear beneath the distance, the tenderness beneath the shutdown, the desire for love wrapped in armor, and then speak to that. Speak to the soul that's scared to come forward, not the ego that's pulling away. Because when you speak to someone's soul, your words bypass their defenses. They land differently. They don't provoke, they awaken. That's why your message matters, and not just what you say, but how you say it. A single line written from deep emotional truth can do more than 100 reactive messages. When you write from love instead of lack, from grounded presence instead of panic, your energy is felt even before the words are read. That's what creates resonance. That's what echoes. You're not here to lecture them about their coping style. You're not here to demand more or convince them of their faults. You're here to be a mirror, to remind them gently but powerfully of what connection can be when it's safe, when it's respectful, when it's rooted in truth. And the moment you do that, you plant a seed. Maybe they won't water it right away. Maybe they won't respond, but they'll feel it. And that feeling, that vibration of safety and clarity might be the first thing that makes them pause, reflect, consider. You're not texting to fix them. You're not trying to force a breakthrough. You're simply aligning with truth, and truth has a way of shaking walls more powerfully than confrontation ever could. Because when someone finally hears the voice that isn't trying to win or chase or demand, but simply see them, everything changes. Not because you told them to change, but because for the first time, they remembered who they could be if they let someone in. You're not trying to fix them, you're calling them forward. That distinction is everything. When someone you care about pulls away, especially an avoidant, it can trigger every part of you that wants to repair, to restore, to reach out and hold things together. But when you make it your mission to fix them, you step into a role that was never yours to begin with. You begin to send messages that subtly say, you're broken, you're wrong, you're not enough as you are. And no one, especially someone wired to protect their independence, responds well to that. Avoidants often grew up in environments where their needs weren't honored, where emotions were seen as weaknesses, or where they had to become self-sufficient far too early. So when someone comes along and tries to fix them, even from a place of love, it feels like control. It feels like intrusion. It feels like another loss of autonomy. But when you shift your energy from fixing to calling them forward, everything changes. You stop relating to their wounds and you start relating to their potential. And people rise not when they're rescued, but when they're remembered. To call someone forward is to see their higher self even when they're hiding. It's to say with your presence, I know there's more in you than this fear, this silence, this avoidance. It's not a demand, it's not pressure, it's an invitation. And that invitation is powerful because it holds space without needing a specific outcome. It says, I'm here, I see you, I won't carry you, but I believe you can walk. When you send a message, especially when the avoidant hasn't replied, you must ask yourself, am I trying to fix them, or am I standing in my truth and calling them back to theirs? Fixing is rooted in fear. Calling forward is rooted in faith. One drains your power, the other amplifies it. You're not their therapist, you're not their savior, you're not the emotional janitor for someone else's unprocessed pain. You are a mirror, a light, a steady presence that reflects what's possible. And if they're ready, that reflection will shake something loose inside them. It might not happen right away, but energy never lies. When someone feels you're coming from strength, not saviorhood, they feel safer to grow. This is the paradox of emotional leadership. The less you try to fix, the more you empower. The less you control, the more influence you carry. The avoidant doesn't need someone to analyze their wounds. They need someone who believes they can rise beyond them. Someone who doesn't crumble at the first sign of resistance. Someone who stands tall, not in judgment, but in deep, grounded clarity. That's what your message becomes. Not a tool to change them, but a reminder of who they could become. And when you speak to that version of them, calmly, confidently, without pressure, you don't just reach their ears, you awaken something in their soul that's been waiting to be called forward all along. The right message doesn't chase, it echoes. In today's world of instant gratification, where we're trained to seek quick replies and rapid validation, silence can feel like rejection. It can feel like punishment. But silence also holds power. And if you understand that power, if you learn to trust it, you realize something transformative, a message sent from truth, from emotional grounding, doesn't need to be repeated. It doesn't need to beg. It simply resonates. When you send a message to someone who is withdrawn, especially an avoidant, it's easy to believe that the more you text, the more you'll be heard. But the truth is, desperation never echoes. It fades. It gets lost in the noise of reaction and fear. What lingers, what sinks into the heart, is not the message sent out of emotional chaos, but the one sent from clarity, intention, and deep self-respect. Avoidants aren't moved by emotional flooding. In fact, they're often triggered by it. They pull away because intense emotional displays make them feel trapped, responsible, or overwhelmed. But what they remember, what stays with them, is a moment of stillness wrapped in strength. A single line of truth that lands not in their mind, but in their nervous system. Something that doesn't demand an immediate reply, but instead creates a ripple inside them they can't shake off. This is what it means for a message to echo. You send it once, not because you don't care, but because you care correctly. You know your worth. You know your energy is valuable. And you trust that the right message, when sent with the right frequency, will do its work, not through repetition, but through resonance. Think of it like music. A powerful note doesn't need to be played over and over. It lingers. It vibrates. It moves something inside you, long after the sound fades. That's the kind of message you send when you're aligned with truth. It's not about clever wording or emotional manipulation. It's about presence. It's about depth. And most importantly, it's about trust. Not just in them, but in yourself. You trust that you don't have to chase love to be worthy of it. You trust that silence isn't always a no. It's sometimes a process. You trust that by speaking once from a place of deep internal alignment, you've done enough. And that trust, that's what makes your message powerful. That's what turns your words into a mirror they'll return to, whether tomorrow or months from now. The avoidant may not reply right away. They might even try to forget the message. But when it's real, when it's rooted in presence, it will come back to them in quiet moments, in vulnerable times, in the places they least expect. Because your message wasn't noise, it was a seed. And when planted in the soil of truth, seeds grow, even if the ground looks dry for a while. So remember, say what's true, say it once, and let it echo. The energy of your alignment will travel further than any repetition ever could. So here you are, standing at the edge of someone else's silence, wondering what to do, how to feel, whether to reach or retreat. And in this moment, you've been given a sacred opportunity, not to chase someone else's love, but to come home to your own, not to convince someone to see your worth, but to speak from a place that never questioned it. You now understand that your power doesn't lie in how many messages you send or how quickly they respond. Your power lies in how deeply you're anchored in truth. You don't text to get validation. You text as an extension of your presence. You text not to pull someone in, but to call them forward. You text not from fear, but from faith, because the one who knows who they are doesn't scream to be heard, they whisper, and the soul listens. When you send that one message, you are not just communicating, you are transmitting. You're saying, I see you. I'm here. I'm whole. And I won't abandon myself to keep you close. That energy is unshakable. That energy is divine. And that energy is what transforms relationships, not by force, but by example. Whether they respond, retreat, or return, you've already won because you chose strength over scrambling. You chose clarity over confusion. You chose alignment over attachment. And that, my friend, is the difference between repeating old patterns and becoming the pattern breaker. So take a breath, feel your power, speak your truth, and let the silence say what it will, because the truth you stand in will always echo louder. Thank you for choosing courage over comfort. Thank you for learning to speak not from your wounds, but from your wisdom. Thank you for honoring your heart without abandoning your spine. Thank you for being a presence that doesn't chase but invites. And thank you for doing the deeper work, because the world needs more people who lead with soul, not strategy. Stay rooted, stay real, and never forget, the right message doesn't force love, it reveals it.